Again, there we go. Got to start recording. Okay. So we're going to do tonight is we're going to look at the bracha of Hashiva Shofetenu Kavarishona. And it's an enigma. This bracha is very unclear. I mean, it is and it isn't at the same time. We'll talk about that. It's going to lead us into a short story in Sefer Melachim, which some of you already will be familiar with. And we will if we don't conclude it tonight, you're going to end up with more questions and answers if we don't finish it tonight. We shall see. First thing we're going to do is take a look at the actual bracha. And before we do that, I want to also mention to you that one thing having to do with pronunciation in this particular bracha. You will notice in this printing that I used that above certain letters, like here you see the pei, here the taf, here the dalid here. You'll see there's like three little dots. That's all different ways in different sidurim how they mark what's called shva na, moving shva. We've talked about this a long time ago, beginning of Tefilla, of how to pronounce properly in Hebrew letters, Hebrew words, but it means in this particular case that you pronounce the I sound. So for example, it's not Hashiva Shofetenu. It's Hashiva Shofetenu, Kevarishona, V'yoratzenu kevat Tefilla. This word is levadecha. This word is v'tzadekenu. If you don't say it like that, it still counts in quotes. But in Kvar you're learning, you should learn also how to properly pronounce the words. And this is true throughout Tefillah, but especially in Shema and Shemona Esrei. And technically it's Shema, not Shema. Okay, so let's just take a look, translate the words into English and see what we're talking about. Hashiva Shofetenu Kavarishona, restore our judges as before. V'yoratzenu kevat techila, and our counselors as at first. Vaser mimenu yagon va'anacha, remove from us sorrow and sighing. Umloch aleinu, ata Hashem levadecha, and you alone, Hashem, should judge us with righteousness, rule over us with righteousness. B'chesed v'rachamim, with mercy. B'tzadekenu b'mishpat, and you should find us righteous in your justice. Baruch Hashem melech ohev tzedakah u'mishpat. Blessed are you, the one who loves righteousness and justice. So the first simple question is, what in the world is this bracha about? You would think, it would seem on the surface, it has to do with justice. And that's true. This bracha is about justice. But it's what appears to be a mix of so many different things that are going on in this particular bracha that it is unclear. If you look at just what's called the chatima, remember the chatima is the bracha itself, the end of it. After the Baruch Atah Hashem, melech ohev tzedakah u'mishpat. Hashem is the king who loves righteousness and justice. So it would seem that this bracha has to do with justice. What kind of justice? What is exactly that we're asking Hashem here for? What's the theme of the bracha? That's another way we've approached this before. Again, just looking at the Chatima, it seems the theme has to do with justice. But are we asking to be judged and to judge us righteously? Most people would say they're happy to wait for Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, for the judgment day, so to speak. But it's even more than that. If we're actually, in theory, if we're asking Hashem to judge us, and I'll give you a laundry list of about 10 questions soon, but right now I'm just talking in very general terms about the concept of justice or judgment that's in this bracha. If we're talking about Hashem judging us, we have another problem from Tanakh that we're going to bring up. But before we do, let's take a look into the Gemara and see what does, I think I skipped one. Yeah, the position of justice in the Talmud. Let's take a look at just a couple of things. And again, this is a shir that can go on for hours on the topic of justice as we find it in the Talmud. Let's just take a look at a couple of statements. One is from Sanhedrin. Amar Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani, Amar Rabbi Yonatan. Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani said in the name of Rabbi Yonatan, Kol dayan shedan din emet. Any judge. We're not talking about a judge in what we call today a civil court. We're talking in a beit din. It could be a civil matter. It could be life a capital case in the time of Beit HaMikdash, whatever it is, but any judge that brought about and did came to a true rendering of a decision in a case, Mashra Shechina B'Yisrael, causes the divine presence of God to rest in Israel. Shneimar, for it says, Elokim nitzav badat el bekerev Elohim yishpot. V'chol dayan she'no dan din emet la'amito. But a judge that doesn't really render a 100% truthful decision. Now, what does that mean? Well, all kinds of things. It means he was potentially bribed. It could be he favored one of the litigants for various reasons, which is asur, obviously. What does he cause? Gorem l'shchina shetistalek misrael. It causes the divine presence to leave Bnei Yisrael. Again, we're talking. These are things that are called mufshat in Hebrew, abstract. Okay, what does it mean that the Shekhinah lives, comes, goes? But at least you get the idea that there's something powerful in rendering a proper judgment in a Beit Din. There's another statement, though, which is a little more global. Tanya, we learn in a Braita. This is a Masechet Shabbat. Rabbi Yossi ben Elisha Omer, Im ra'ita dor shetzarot rabot ba'ot alad. If you see a generation in which they're suffering tremendous amounts of pain and suffering, stay uvdok b'dainei Yisrael. You know what you should do? Now, understand that this is an opinion. This isn't halacha. This is the opinion of Rabbi Yossi ben Elisha. Say uvdok b'dainei Yisrael. You should go and seek and check the judges who are judging in Bnei Yisrael. Shekol puranut sheba'a leolam. Any travesty, any bad things that happen in the world, lo ba'a ela bishvil dainei Yisrael, only happen because of the judges of Israel. Meaning they're on the take, they're favoring litigants one over another and doing all the things they're not supposed to. Then the tzarot of Bnei Yisrael happen because of them. Again, this is not halacha. This is his perspective. It's his hashkafic outlook. It's his philosophical outlook in the world. Why dafka? Why specifically did it have to do with this? That all these problems are happening. So you can give some potential answers, because if you're not aware, one of the 7 mitzvot b'nei Noach is to have a court system. It's not just Jews have a court system. It's one of the 7 mitzvot b'nei Noach that there's supposed to be a court system, because the court system, as we will discover when we talk about this bracha, is one of the foundations of a well-run society. You know, having the equivalent of policemen and judges and all. But I will put a little parenthesis here. This is a Braita. Braita means it was the equivalent of a Mishnah. So it's a time of Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi. It wasn't included in the actual Mishnah, in the 6 sections of the Mishnah, but it has the power of a Mishnah. Why am I mentioning that? Because we're not talking about you and me. We're not talking about people, even the great rabbis of today. The people of the Mishnah, the rabbis at the time of the Mishnah, could have made statements like this that they understand in their mind and the way understood the way the world runs, to say that when bad things are happening, it could be because of X. Unfortunately, what's happened over centuries is that when there's a tsunami, when there is a terrible tragedy, when there's all these other things that happen, suddenly these rabbis decide, I'll tell you why it's happened. Because God's mad, because it's almost always blaming the women, because their dresses were too short, or they had the high heels, or they did doing something with new. They never blame the men, and they never blame themselves, right? And the problem with that is that the 2 words I'll use is sheker v'chazab. Sheker v'chazab means lie and treachery. Why? Because we know that nowadays nivuah, prophecy, is given to 2 types of people: shotim, people who are not mentally healthy, and tanim, like minors. So if these rabbis are making these statements, they're not tanim, they're not young. So maybe they're shotim. I don't know. I'm not talking about anyone specific. I'm just a global statement. We have no right. We do not have that ability to say why God does something. Because if you do, you're saying you know why Hashem does something. We don't know. It's impossible. I was doing a shiva call many, many years ago. A friend of mine passed away. And I guess I was like the 5th or 6th rabbi that came in the room to be Menachem Avel over the period of a few days. And a woman turned to me, who was the sister of my friend, and said, Rabbi, I'm going to ask you like I asked every rabbi who walked in here. Why did God take my brother? He was such a good man. First of all, he really was. I said to her, if anyone actually answered you that question, please understand that they're a shofet, that they're a fool. Because how are we supposed to know? How do we assume God's knowledge that why Hashem did something? We can understand that there's a concept of midah keneged midah, measure for measure, there's reward and punishment. But to say Hashem did this because of that, if P then Q, that's way above our pay grade. It's above everyone's pay grade. We don't exist like that. So we go back now to this. I know I'm kind of digressing a little, but it's very important here because otherwise you could start walking out of here and saying, oh, God, because of this, we don't know. But Rabbi Yossi ben Elisha has this ability and the right because at the time of the Tanaim, think about the greatest possible rabbi you may ever known, read about, heard about. Take for someone like Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, Tzadik v'Kadosh Livracha, probably the greatest halachic mind since the Rambam, and since the last 1,000 years, and less, 800 years. He didn't come to the toenails of Tana. It's not a degradation of Moshe. He himself would have been the first one to tell you that. And it wouldn't be because of his humility, it's because of fact. So when we talk about people who that much closer to the Masorah, to the actual giving the Torah, different world. We don't have that right. Okay, so now that I will now get off my soapbox. Before we even talk about the question of what does it mean? Are we asking Hashem to judge us? Are we not? I came across this in a sefer I bought a while back. I thought it was fascinating. I'd never seen this before. There is a book I have. I just never noticed this particular statement. It's called Baruch She'amar. It's by Baruch Levi Epstein, by a relative of the author of the Aruch HaShulchan. And in there, it's a book on Tefilla. And in there, he makes the following comment. One thing I didn't mention to you was, it says in the bracha, one of the many, many, many questions, and I just want to jump into it because I have the slide in front of me. It says, V'haser mimenu yagon v'anacha. Remove from us pain and suffering and sadness and groaning and moaning. What's it doing there? Okay, that's going to be one of the laundry, like I said, list of questions we're going to have. But what's it doing there in this bracha about returning the idea of mishpat, the judgment? So he says like this: Ra'iti b'sefer dimdumei chama. I saw in the sefer called Dimdumei Chama, Amevi misidur ktav yad yashan noshan, that in a sidur there was a ktav yad, a manuscript, a handwritten one that was ancient. It said, "V'haser mimenu machut yavan v'romi." The original way the bracha, according to this opinion, in this one version of the sidur, was remove from us, please, the kingdoms of Greece and Rome. וקרוב לומר כי שלטו בזה מבקרים, צנזורים קנאים, ומחקו נוסח זה. And it's probable that censors, either from our own people or people who would inspect the books from the government, the censors erased it of Greece and Rome. ומסדרי התפילות מילאו את המקום מהחלק בלשון החלק, and that the people who organized the tefillot at that time period, they used that space that they took out Yavan Rome, or Greece and Rome, they were put in the words, Haser mimenu yagon v'anach. Remove from us sorrow and suffering. Relative to the pain and suffering they were having from the governments at that time, which also meant a lot of false things the Jews were accused of. So it worked in a little bit, so to speak, to mishpat. Okay, that's fine. That's if you like, that's fine. If you don't, moving on. Now, what I do want to show you is this. Are we talking about a bracha where we're asking Hashem to judge us? It sounds like it. It sounds like it. The problem with that is the story in Sefer Melachim. So some of you learn Sefer Melachim either with me or by yourselves or in school. You will remember that Eliyahu Hanavi had I don't know what the right word is, a protege. There you go, a protege whose name was Elisha. And Elisha, hold on, I'm gonna just double check something here. Hang on 1 second. Don't go away. Just bear with me for a second. I see these. Okay. Let me just go back to the source here. Yeah, okay. So I want to make sure I had the cycle of events in my head correctly, and I did. Let's go back here. Okay. So Elisha would go as the protege of Eliyahu after Eliyahu, I won't say died because it's not true that necessarily he died. He went in a Sarah, he was brought up in a whirlwind into heaven. He would go around different communities and he would do miraculous things and he would help people and he would bring justice to communities that has nothing to do with this bracha right now. And he went through this one city all the time called Shunem. And in the city was a woman whose house he would go to. This woman, the Isha Hashunamit, whose name is not recorded. And she and her husband had this place, and he would come to this town often enough that she would make a special room for him. It would be upstairs. It had a light, and it had a table, and had all the kind of things that actually were representations of the Beit HaMikdash. And at some point, Elisha says to Gehazi. Gehazi was his boy who helped him. He said, I want you to go to the Isha Shunamit and ask her, what can I do for you? Vayomelo. And he said, and Elisha said to Gehazi, Emorna eleha, go to her and say to her, Hinei charadet elenu et kol hacharada hazot. You've gone to all this trouble for us. Mela sotlach. What is it that we can do for you? Would you like us to speak to the king on your behalf? Or do you want us to speak to the head of the army, like get some protexia there? But Tomer, and she said, she doesn't say yes. She doesn't say no. She says, I live among my people. What's the question and what's the answer here? Midrash tells us that the day that this conversation takes place was Rosh Hashanah. And what Elisha is asking her is, do you want me to talk to Hamelech, as in Hamelech, by Nusach Ashkenaz, the beginning of Shacharit, right? He said, do you want me to talk to the king on your behalf, to go to Hashem and say, look at all these amazing things this woman has done for me. I, as your Navi, I would like to see that she gets rewarded. Would you like me, he says to her, to talk to God for you? And she says, I sit among my people. What does that mean? She says, absolutely, positively, no way do I want you to talk to Hashem about me. I do not want the spotlight on me. What does that mean? I'm among my people. What does that mean? The difference between, now we know that Hashem judges everyone one at a time. Kivnei maron, one person at a time. It's not really what it means, but I'm going to say that one person at a time, everyone gets judged. But we also know that when a person's part of a tzibur, they're part of a kihila, part of a congregation, a community, and they're not just by themselves, that, and I'm making up terms now because it's not really like this, but let's say there's 100 people in a shul, you got a couple of schnooks in there, but Hashem looks at not only the individual, but the community. Okay, he's part of a community, she's part of a community, another year of life. It's part of a mindset that we don't want the spotlight on us. And that's what she says. I don't want to be judged alone. So the question now becomes, among the other questions, is if this bracha is really about Hashem judging us, why would we want to be judged? Why would we want to be stick out like a sore thumb and ask us, okay, come on, bring it on? Another thing the Gemara tells us elsewhere, we should never say to Hashem, ever, the other day I went so above and beyond. Someone tripped, and I decided I was going to drive into the emergency room. I stayed there until the family member came. I followed up. I drove them home. Hashem, I deserve something for that. Should never, the Gemara says, never say something like that. Because then Hashem has the right, so to speak, say, very nice. You got a big yasher koach. Sit down. I have about 500,000 other things you've done that make what you did, you're going to get rewarded for it. But it's going to seem very insignificant compared to all this other stuff you've been doing your whole life. Let's talk during this last year. So you don't want to ever start to try to bring your zechuyot before Hashem and say, hey, look what I've done. Because it brings what's called kitrug. Kitrug means accusation, right? A kid, let's say, is a troubled child. I don't want to use that example. You have an adult who's not good. He cheats people in business. He lies. He steals. He does all of it. And one day he gives $1,000 to a tzedakah, dollars, that shekel to $1,000 to tzedakah, that puts them over the top, and they do their whole charity giving. They went over the top, and now everyone's going to match their funds. Look what I've done. I gave $1,000 to tzedakah. Look what happened. I get my name up on a board. Is that really matzdik? Does that really justify everything else, the bad things he's done? Of course not. So the concept of all this judging thing is a big, big deal. Now, there's a difference between judging and being judgmental. In Hebrew, it's lishpot, the judge, and shiputi, liyot shiputi. Shiputi means being judgmental. It's a very different thing, and that's a different topic, which we're not going to get into, but it's just to kind of keep it in your head. So the question is, before we go to the one of the questions that I have on the screen, I have a few questions. Well, actually, let me just put these first. In general, why the beginning of the bracha says that we want to restore our judges of old and our counselors of old. What does it have to do with justice? What do counselors have to do with yotzim? What does it have to do with justice? And why do we hearken back to an olden time? What does it remove our sorrow and sighing from us? Rule over us, Hashem, alone. You alone should rule over us. What does this have to do with the theme of the bracha? And what is it, again, what are we asking for? And when we do talk about justice, we talk about kindness and mercy. These attributes are surely ones we prefer, but nonetheless, if the bracha is about justice, why are we stressing mercy and kindness? Okay, so justice is not necessarily, it can be with mercy, but I'll give you a scenario where mercy makes no sense for justice. Somebody, God forbid, murders another individual, and the person who did the murder is an indigent, doesn't have any money, he's been down in his luck for years, he was abused as a kid, the whole story. And the judge looks at him and said, look, it's murder, but look at all these extenuating circumstances, all these mitigating circumstances. Tell you what, you're going to serve 6 months in jail, and it's $10,000 you're going to have to pay as a fine. Now, was there justice done? Maybe from the perspective of the indigent guy who committed the murder, there was justice. But was that justice? And there was mercy also. So, but no man or woman in his right mind would think that was really justice. So what? Now, yes, there are definitely extenuating circumstances and things happen bad. Yes, there are definitely mitigating circumstances, but it's maybe an extreme kind of situation. So again, there are all kinds of issues. What does it mean, acquit us in judgment? In the Chatima, we talk about Hashem as the king. Melech ohev tzedakah u'mishpat. During the Aseret Yemei Teshuvah, it's HaMelech HaMishpat. Ad kedei kach, it's so important, HaMelech HaMishpat, that according to some opinions in Adot Mizrach and in the Sfaradi world, that if not in the Ashkenazim say, if you don't say HaMelech HaMishpat, you said Melech ohev tzedakah u'mishpat, you don't repeat Shemona Esrei. There are some opinions in the Sfaradi world that if you didn't say HaMelech HaMishpat, you have to repeat Shemona Esrei, just like if you didn't say HaMelech HaKadosh. But why in this bracha raise the idea of Melech? Dafka this one doesn't say Melech Mochel v'Soleach, right? We say that on Yom Kippur, we say that on Rosh Hashanah, Melech Mochel v'Soleach Ata, but we don't say that in the bracha of the Shemona Esrei. We don't say he's the Melech. We don't say he's the Rofeichol Amo Yisrael. We don't say Hashem is the Melech of tshuva. It's just, what's it doing here? Melech. What does it mean Hashem loves righteousness and justice? Of course Hashem loves righteousness and justice. What's it have to do? What does it mean? What does it have to do with anything, the power of Hashem to dispense it? Okay. I'm going to add, before we look at this beginning of the answer here, I'm going to add a little bit more, some more questions. This is probably the most of the 12 central brachot in Shemona Esrei, the most enigmatic, the most problematic, the most unclear of what it is we're asking. We ask for refuah. Yes, we end up talking about it. It has to do with the connection to Hashem and all, but why is it just about Jews? So we saw that it's a little bit more enigmatic. Slach lanu, pretty straightforward. Hashivenu avinu, pretty straightforward. What's this really all? What's about? So I add a couple more questions. What's this? And part of it we already saw a little bit of. What's this nostalgic? We want to be like the olden days. No, that's gotten us into problems. Where did it get us into problems? Bnei Yisrael in the desert after going out of Mitzrayim. And once again, things aren't going well. They don't have water. They don't have bamba, whatever it might be. They always have something to complain about. And they say the line, Zacharnu et hadaga she'achalnu chilam. I remember the Tavatiach v'takishu. I remember in Mitzrayim, it was so great. We had free-flowing food. Auschwitz was great. We had this pea. We had one little scoop of soup and crusty bread. Shtuyot. There's something called euphoric recall. When people in addictions counseling, there's something called euphoric recall. What does that mean? That when you talk to an addict about when they were using, let's say you're talking heroin addict, and they're in recovery, and they think about when they were using, they think about it in such amazing, it was so great, that high was fantastic, and I was hallucinating. I don't know if you hallucinate with heroin, I don't remember. The hallucinations, with LSD you do. And whatever else, I was able to do this, and I felt like this. When tachlis, they're killing themselves slowly. That's called euphoric recall. And that's what the Jews were saying when they were in the desert. I remember the fish, and I remember the watermelon, and I remember the euphoric recall. What's the matter of fact? Kohelet, Shlomo HaMelech said, if I just now thought of, I looked at the pasuk that I can put out on the screen. Shlomo HaMelech said that asking and saying we want things to be how like the olden days is not asking from a point of chokhmah. It's a lack of wisdom. I just don't remember the words of the pasuk. So my father, Olav Shalom, had told me once, it's his chiddush, his new idea. And I think I mentioned this in some other class recently. One of the attributes that makes a person that's considered a shoteh, someone who is not allowed to be a witness because he's not considered mentally stable, is a lan bevet hakvarot, someone who sleeps in cemeteries. So my father, Olav Shalom, would say, it's not that they necessarily literally slept in the cemetery, but they live in the past. They live in the past. They can't deal with the present. And there's something to be said about that. So what is this in our bracha here where all of a sudden we're talking about, let's reinstitute like it was so great back then? Besides which, who are these yoatzim? Who are the shoftim we're talking about? Who are these judges? Who are these counselors that we're talking about? Again, what does the removing sorrow have to do with anything? And the kindness and mercy. One of the ways to understand the hitpatchut, the development of Shemona Esrei, is to look at something called, as soon as I remember, Tefillah Ktsara. What's Tefillah Ktsara? So let's take a look at the next slide. So Gemara in Masechet Brachot. Let's assume for some reason a person does not have the ability to daven the entire Shemona Esrei because of time constraints. Maybe they're in a dangerous area. Maybe they literally could be a chayal. He has 2 minutes, a minute before where he's standing now and he has to go out to battle. Whatever it might be, various things. So there's a bracha that was crafted that is a tamtzit, or a concentration, so to speak, of all the central part of Shemona Esrei. So I'm going to take a look at what the Gemara tells us. Rabbi Yoshua Mir, Me'en Shmona Esrei. So the Mishnah had mentioned the topic of something called a form of, a derivative of Shmona Esrei. The Gemara asks, "My Me'en Shmona Esrei." What does that mean? What does it mean, a derivative of Shmona Esrei? Rav Amar Me'en Kol Bracha U Bracha. So Rav says it means a derivative of every single bracha of Shmona Esrei. Ushmuel Amar, and Shmuel says it's something called Habinenu. If you look in certain Sidurim, you will not find it in a lot of them. First time I ever saw it, by the way, was in the Birnbaum Siddur of all places in the United States. But you'll find it in some. I don't remember if the Art Scroll includes it. It's called Havinenu. Havinenu Hashem Elokeinu Ladat Drachecha. I'm going to read through this, and this is the first few brachot of the middle part of Shmona Esrei. And you'll pick up a couple words that sound familiar from Shmona Esrei. This is the bracha of Da'at, of the first bracha of the central part. Havinenu Hashem Elokeinu Ladat Drachecha, Umolet Levavenu Liratecha, V'tislach lanu liot geulim, V'rachakenu mimach ovenu, V'tashnenu binot artzecha, Unfutzotenu me'arba tekabetz. This last three words has to do with kibbutz galuyot, which we talked about, being gathering exiles. And this one is what refers to our bracha, the tamtzit, or the concentration of this miniature Shmona Esrei. Has the one line of this entire bracha is v'hatoim al da'atcha yishpetu, which means that those who have erred or veered from your path shall be judged. Okay, so now we start to get just an inkling what this bracha might potentially be about. But who's going to judge? What's going to be judged? What does that exactly mean? Yishpetu means they shall be judged. That's what's called savil in Hebrew. There's pa'il and savil. Pa'il means active, and savil means passive. For example, I throw the ball is active. Ani zorek et hakadur. I am throwing the ball. Pa'il, active. Hakadur nizrak. The ball is thrown. That's called savil or passive. It means it talks about an action that happened to the ball, not that I did the action. So this is called lashon savil. It is a passive statement. Those who veered from your ways shall be judged. By whom? So there's a Gemara. I didn't think to put it on the screen, which I probably should for next time, because we will not get much further than this tonight. There's a Gemara I have here in front of me that comes from also Gemara Brachot. It says Rabbi Yonah says that it means Hashem should judge all sinners. That we're actually asking in this Havinenu, this miniature Shmona Esrei. By the way, just back up a second. If someone ever does need to say this, they say the first three brachot of Shmona Esrei, this little paragraph, this is only part of it, and then the last three brachot of Shmona Esrei. There's one other micro Shmona Esrei, which is like one line, which will for another time, but just know that this is something that can be done if necessary. It's rare, very rare, but it can be done, especially if someone's sick and they only have a little bit of ability to say something. Okay. So Rabbi Yonah says in the Gemara that when it says here, let me get over here, that those who have veered from your ways, meaning your Torah, should be judged. It means dafka by Hashem. Hashem should judge all sinners. And that really does fit with our bracha, because our bracha, let's just go back up for a second. Go back all the way. I should have made another copy. It says, yeah, it talks about Hashem ruling over us. In this case, we're going to use this term of rule in the same context as mishpat, that Hashem should be the one to judge us. And that's what Rabbi Yonah said, not Rabbi Yonah, Rabbi Yonah. Go back to here. Okay. And that is the opinion also of the Tur as well, that this bracha, in this Havinenu bracha, of the tamtzit, or the concentration of a miniature Shmona Esrei, means that we're asking Hashem to judge those who have sinned. However, let me see here. Rashi says that's not what it means. Rashi, the Tur says that that's what it means, just like the Gemara that means that Hashem should judge the sinners. Rashi says it means they should be judged by Torah law. What does that mean? The court system, the Sanhedrin. So now that's a little bit different. Now we're talking about the restoration of the Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin being the Jewish high court. So when we're talking about restoring the judges of old, it's not just that we're having these nice little flashbacks and fantasies of how great things once were. According to Rashi, what we're really asking for is that we want to restore the Sanhedrin. And that's under very specific circumstances that can happen. The Sanhedrin requires certain things, such as Beit HaMikdash, Kibbutz Galuyot. So we already talked about Kibbutz Galuyot last time, the ingathering of the exiles. What about Mashiach, Beit HaMikdash? We get to it. So this is somewhere in the middle here. But again, we also know that a bracha in Shemona Esrei has some text base in Tanakh. So where's the text base for this bracha? We're still working on all these. We have not resolved many of these questions yet. There's just a lot of questions floating around. It's also, we have a little inkling based on Rashi's interpretation of what's going on here. So this is the source text. This is found in Yeshayahu. This is the Yeshayahu says as follows: "Hashiva Shofetayach kevarishona." I will restore your judges as of old, magistrates. "V'yoatzayach kevatechila," and your counselors as of old times, of original times. "Achrechen," after that, after I do that, "Yikarei lach ir hatzedek kirya ne'emana." Then Yerushalayim will be called the city of righteousness, or the faithful city. Tzion b'mishpat tipadeh. Tzion, Israel, it actually means Yerushalayim generally, shall be saved through judgment. V'shaveha b'tzedakah, and her repentant ones in retribution, in tzedakah, in tzedek. So wait a second. We start to see here now a little bit of an inkling into what is the relationship between restoration of judges and yoatzim. We haven't identified exactly who. Maybe it's the Sanhedrin, maybe it's other kind of judges who are these yoatzim, these counselors, these advisors. But we start to see that there's a connection between the idea of there should be some kind of judgment that will take place. It seems to support Rashi, that we're talking about the people who've erred will be judged by a Sanhedrin or by Batei Din, by Jewish court. And there's the flip side, though. There's a flip side. If you take a look at a few psukim that come before the one I just read, it says as follows. Again, this is Yeshayahu. Lachen ne'uma Adon Hashem tzvakot, avir Yisrael, hoi enachem mitzarai v'inakma me'oivai. Let me see the English here. Oh, I hate this English. Assuredly, this is the declaration of the sovereign God of hosts, the mighty one of Israel. I will get satisfaction from my foes, will wreak vengeance on my enemies. Hashiva yadi alayich, I will place my hand, or turn my hand against you. Ve'etzrov kabor sigayich, and I will smelt out your dross as with lye. V'asira kol bedilayich, and remove all your slag. This is the visual of separating out what's the dross, like the impurities, like out of lead, for example. What's that talking about? That sounds like a picture of divine retribution, right? The God's judging us. The next couple of psukim I just read earlier sound like we're asking that Hashem's going to set it up that he's going to bring back the judges and the court system, and so to speak, Shalom Yisrael. The judges are going to judge. So which is it? We're not going to answer this tonight. This is very true. By the way, I have to go back a second and say, let me back up. When I kept saying Rebbe Yonah, it's not. It's Rabbeinu Yonah. I said it wrong. I knew something didn't sound right in my head. Talking about Rabbeinu Yonah. Rabbeinu Yonah is the one who said that God will judge the sinners based on this bracha in Havinenu. And Rashi, as I said, it'll be the Torah, meaning the judges will judge those who have sinned. Okay? So we have a contradiction almost. On the one hand, we have the good side, where Hashem says he'll restore the judges, and that means that we'll be judged by the judges. And the psukim that come before it sounds like Hashem's going to do the judging. So is it Rabbeinu Yonah's interpretation? Is it Rashi's interpretation? What are we asking for? We're going to stop here. There was something I was going to add, though, at the end. I have to think just a minute. Oh, yeah. As I mentioned it along the way, I said, in my head, I said, I just mentioned at the end. One of the things that people tend to do, a lot, is judge. We talked about this in Pirkei Avot. We talked about this in the Siyat Sharim in the classes I've given over the years. And that's the idea of what's called, again, shiputiyut, being shiputi, being judgmental. And I actually heard someone say to me once, I got into a conversation with someone who was very judgmental. And I said, why are you so judgmental? He says, why not? He says, we're supposed to be like God. I said, what are you talking about? So, of course, I knew what he's talking about. There's the Gemara tells us, we've seen it many times. We've talked about it, Mahu Afata, just like he is, we are supposed to be. It's called imitatio Dei. We're supposed to imitate God. God judges. Why shouldn't I judge too? He's being serious. I really had to hold my tongue, obviously, because if I said what I really wanted to say, he probably never would have talked to me again, and he would have been judging me the rest of my life. Just fine. It's his problem, not mine. But shiputiyut, or being judgmental, has a double problem. Number one, it's the antithesis of v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, love your neighbor as yourself, and maybe more than one problem. Number two, it causes lashon hara. Number three, it causes potentially ayin hara if you believe in it. There's so many problems with concept of shiputiyut, or being judgmental, that it also destroys relationships, and that's one of the worst ones. But I just, like I said, I wanted to mention that along the way while we're talking about the whole concept of shoftim, or shofetim. We will, Bezrat Hashem, next week, again on Monday, Yom Sheni at night, or Yom Gimel. We'll continue with class, with the questions, and I'll start answering some of these questions. I was asked already now by more than one or two people when we're going back to Sunday night. Bezrat Hashem, that will be the 19th of Kislev, of Tevet, and 19th January. It's the same date. And I'll continue sending reminders. In the meantime, everyone have a good night. Hope for more Besorot Tovot. A lot less of these, not less, zero bad news, only good news from this point on. And just also understand, as I'm sure you do, you are living, watching history unfold before your eyes. I was telling somebody today who was 16 years old what it was like to watch, literally on TV, to watch the fall of communism, destruction of the Berlin Wall, the USSR falling, becoming, and then all the new countries that came about as a result of the fall of communism. It took me years to stop saying the Ukraine. But we're watching, we're witnessing history, and we're watching not just history, we're watching Yad Hashem, moving on the chess pieces. What was unthinkable 14 months ago, how we've suffered, had so many horrific things that have happened this last 14 months. There is a big shift coming, a big change coming. Bezrat Hashem. Hinei yamim ba'im num Hashem. Hashem says, these days are coming. Open Sefer Zechariah. If you've never learned Sefer Zechariah, open it up. I think start chapter 9, if I'm not mistaken. Just start reading what Hashem, and then just look at what's going on. Look what's going on in the countries around us. Look what's going on in Yerushalayim. Look what's going on in the world. And it's nevuot. They're all coming true right now. Baruch Hashem. We should be zochim to see them come true to the complete fruition. And this whole business of Hashiva Shofetenu Kavar Rishona, that means the Sanhedrin, it should happen soon. All right. Laila Tov, everybody.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you all for being there.